all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of ear and eye, for the heart and mind's delight, for the mystic harmony, linking sense to sound and sight, source of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the wonder of each hour, of the day and of the night, hill and vale and tree and flower, sun and moon and stars of light, source of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of human care, sister, brother, parent, child, for the kinship we all share, for all gentle thoughts and mild, source of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise.
Good morning. My name is Sibel Shattuck, and I am a member of the Sunday Services Committee and the Green Sanctuary Committee. Welcome to People's Church. Our church building is in the Kalamazoo River watershed on the ancestral lands of the Potawatomi people. We share this land with a diversity of plants and creatures, including the redbud trees that are just now brightening our landscape with their brilliant pink blossoms, and chipmunks that move from point A to point B so quickly, I begin to think that they may have actually developed some Star Trek-like matter transportation system. The people who make up the People's Church community have diverse beliefs. We are a kaleidoscope of agnostics and atheists, Buddhists and Neoplatonists, polytheistic pagans, and maybe even some monotheists. Despite our diversity, we do have some shared convictions, and prominent among them are commitments to social justice and care for the earth. So welcome to all on this Earth Day Sunday.
Good morning. Our first reading today comes from Dr. Drew Lanham, an ornithologist who teaches at Clemson University. He describes how his life changed with the pandemic. In 2020, he could not travel in the summer to watch birds as he usually does in various areas of North America and the world. He complained that his planned wild excursions were reoriented from Western prairie and range to backyard lawn and Adirondack chair. And I quote, "And there, in a space roughly 3/4 the size of a football field, littered with non-native plants and a plastic bathtub-sized pond and weeds, surrounded by rusting chain link and mid-1970s ranch homes, I watched the tropics filter through as rose-breasted grosbeaks, chimney swifts, scarlet tanagers, and several different warblers, vireos, and thrushes found the space good enough for rest and refueling. As I see it, fear and resentment define the last 3/4 of the year more than any other emotions. But the backyard is the antithesis. As secure and isolated a place as I know without going into some wildness. A step out the sliding back door, through the screen porch, and there's green. Green means peace. I could breathe out there, and it became a daily destination, or maybe a pilgrimage.
There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my soul. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my soul. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my heart. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my heart. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing in my mind. And it's telling me that I'm somebody. There's a river flowing in my mind. There's a river flowing. There's a river flowing. There's a river flowing in my soul.
Our chalice lighting reading for today comes from David Breeden. Our light is the light of the sun, keeper of all we love. Our light is the light of the earth, provider of sustenance. Our light is the light of all living things, life precious like our own. Our light is the light of each of us, bound together in need and hope. Our light is the light of the cosmos, keeper of all we know.
I'm back again with the stewardship report, the last one that we have scheduled. We will talk about it a little bit at the annual meeting, but this is it for now. We have, as of yesterday, 136 pledges for $276,000. The average pledge is now $2,027, which is an increase of $350 over last year. That's phenomenal. We have about 16 prospects outstanding. That's as normal for a possible additional 22,000, which would bring us very close to 300,000. What I see in the pattern is that people who can have upped their pledge significantly to compensate for those who can't. And you can read it in the record if you see the numbers. And I want to thank you all and congratulate us on what I regard as one bold expression of a beloved community. Thank you, everybody.
I'm here downtown Kalamazoo on a beautiful spring day, watching the river flow by. As I watch rivers and water flow, I like to think of where this water started, where it's going, what kind of plants and people and other animals have lived on it or by it or in it, depended on it for living their daily existence. And I want to share a story with you that is beautiful, and it's about people not too far from us who are working hard to keep protecting the water that connects us all. It's called We Are Water Protectors. Water is the first medicine, Newcomus told me. We come from water. It nourished us inside our mother's bodies as it nourishes us here on Mother Earth. Water is sacred, she said. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. The river's rhythm runs through my veins, runs through my people's veins. Many people talk of a black snake that will destroy the land. Spoil the water, poison plants and animals, wreck everything in its path. When my people first spoke of the black snake, they foretold that it wouldn't come for many, many years. Now the black snake is here. Its venom burns the land, courses through the water, making it unfit to drink. Take courage. I must keep the black snake away from my village's water. I must rally my people together. To stand for the water, to stand for the land, to stand as one against the black snake. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. It will not be easy. We fight for those who cannot fight for themselves. The winged ones, the crawling ones, the four-legged, the two-legged, the plants, trees, rivers, lakes. The earth. We are all related. Tears like waterfalls stream down, tracks down my face, tracks down my people's faces. Water has its own spirit, Newcomus told me. Water is alive. Water remembers our ancestors who came before us, she said. We stand with our songs and our drums. We are still here. We are stewards of the earth. Our spirits have not been broken. We are water protectors. We stand. The black snake is in for the fight of its life.
The book that April read so beautifully, the author, Carol Lindstrom, is an Anishinaabe Métis and is enrolled with the Turtle Mountain Band of Ojibwe. And she was unable to physically join many of her tribe and members of the Standing Rock Sioux in the fight to protect sacred land from the Dakota Access Pipeline. So she wrote this book as her contribution to that. And the illustrator who created those glorious, glorious paintings, Michaela Goad, is of Tlingit descent and enrolled with the Central Council of the Tlingit and Haida tribes of Alaska. I'm always struck by the refrain, "We are still here." The indigenous communities of North America have of late been reaching out to remind us they are still here and they have wisdom to share that would help all of us change the way we're living in our relationship with our beautiful earth home. Alan talked about the generosity of people's people, and now is the time when I remind you that we also have the tradition of weekly offerings as part of that generosity. There are the large gifts that people make that keep our church going through financial means, and then there's the generosity of all of the small gifts, which are no less meaningful. And I was so struck by the generosity of people's people in this past couple weeks, as so many of you responded to our request for images and sent us beautiful photographs and beautiful descriptions of what those places had meant to you. So now we will post a link in the chat if you'd like to use it to make an electronic offering. And meanwhile, we have the joy of listening to the people's singers.
Under snow the earth is renewing. After frost the fields are blooming. Over time and beyond doubt, all is new again. After loss our souls are grieving. Under stars our lives are healing. Over time and beyond doubt, all is new again. Listen and you'll hear a
Please join me in expressing gratitude for the generosity of our community members. From the countless gifts we each have been given, gifts of life and love and sustenance, we bring these small portions to share in the works of love which none of us can accomplish alone. That same sense of community is expressed in our weekly practice of sharing our joys and our sorrows with each other. As a church community, we support each other by celebrating together the good things in our lives and by listening to learn how we might be able to help our community members who are having difficult times. If you have a joy or a sorrow to share, please share it in the chat, and I will pause the recording so that this part of our service will not end up on the internet.
Morning. This reading is an excerpt from Gwen Frostic's book, A Walk with Me. Up on the edge of the bluffs, look far out over the waves, out where the sky begins and white clouds form. Soon a gull drifts by in the wind, and little sandpipers appear on the beach below, and you are not alone. In the open fields where sweet clover blows and Queen Anne's lace and asters grow, a bumblebee hums among the flowers, and little goldfinches fill the air, and you are not alone. In the deep woods, all seems so still. Leaves rustle a bit, and a chipmunk runs. A little toad sits on the deep green moss, and you are not alone. It's times like these that you come to know how much a part of everything you are, how much all things are part of you. And this was from Gwen Frostic's book, A Walk with Me.
An excerpt from The Secret is in the Soil by Simran Sethi. As I write these words, my eyes drift to my nails, dirty and ragged from weeding. I think back to a day about 9 months ago when they were pink, even, and perfectly filed. A time when I had things to do, places to go, worlds to inhabit and change, and I did not have time to weed. Today, the stubborn shoots are a type of salvation. Against a landscape of rocks, sage, and trees abundant with bitter oranges and sweet limes, the weeds ground me. You are here, they say, and so are we. Although these days are rife with uncertainty, we now know that we can swap seeds, share knowledge, and nurture our capacity to grow food. We can forge a greater appreciation of food available in season and more deeply savor meals without meat. We can fight for living wages, just visas, and public policy that confers the respect that the work of feeding should engender. And we can support media that share stories respecting all culinary traditions and those that uplift voices to encourage a deeper, more just flourishing. We are not the same people we were 10 years or even 10 months ago. Yet we struggle to remember that the future is shaped by what we feed and water today, that it blooms through us. It is fertile soil, dense forest, and open field. It is weed and herb and flower and fruit, the manifestation of what we allow to bud and ripen as well as what we draw out. We can cultivate with purpose, remembering the lessons embedded in the seeds we chose to sow, pruning back systems that have failed so many, and nurturing tender shoots of awareness into commitment. We can nourish what we have found in one another. I hold these thoughts as I haphazardly pick the soil from my nails and turn back toward the garden. The weeds are there, but so are the pollinators. I dig my hands through the small rocks and pull.
I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river. I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain. I've got joy like a fountain in my soul. I've got love like the ocean. I've got love like ocean. I've got love like the ocean. I've got love like the ocean in my soul. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain in my soul. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain. I've got strength like a mountain in my soul.
When I heard Professor Lanham speaking with Krista Tippett on NPR in February, his description of 2020 as a pilgrimage to his own backyard struck a chord. Like him, the normal summer travels that are part of my academic and personal life were halted by the pandemic. I had plans to go out of state to attend a conference and also to visit my family in California, then spend some time in the Sierra. As a California kid, I have to tell you, I love the greenery of Michigan, but we really could use some decent mountains over here. But instead of getting to go to the Sierra, I spent much of the summer under a maple tree in my backyard in Cooper Township. Now, I always spend some time in my yard during the summer, but this past year, it seemed like I was out there every single day. And I don't think that was just because the governor ordered us to stay home and stay safe and shut down most businesses, so there was nowhere to go anyway. I think it was because my yard had become a refuge, a safe space, sheltered from the chaos of outside events. First the pandemic in the spring, then the violence and protest marches of summer, and finally a bitter election season in the fall. Spending all that time in my green oasis, I became more aware of the plants and animals with whom I shared that space. One day, I noticed that all the squirrels and songbirds seemed to have just completely vanished. And searching for the cause, I discovered a pair of broad-shouldered hawks casing the joint, moving from tree to tree in search of unwary prey. As I spent more time weeding, an activity that Catherine Niesink highly recommends, I noticed a peony that had grown unhappy as the maple tree expanded the shade canopy overhead, so I moved it to a sunnier spot. And then there was the day when I was sitting under that maple tree reading a book, and I looked up into the tree and simply started laughing because there was garlic mustard growing in the crotch of the tree at least 10 feet over my head. Mother Nature has a really wicked sense of humor. Most of us know intuitively that time in nature is a balm when life is difficult. When we're feeling frazzled, when our nerves are on edge, when we're mentally depleted and having trouble concentrating, when we're sad, when we're upset by something that happened at work or school or a conflict with someone, we often find ourselves heading outdoors. Maybe you like to go for a walk in the park or sit under a favorite tree. Maybe you head for water, down to a river or out to a lake, and just watch the water until somehow you start to feel better, even though you didn't really do anything. As the author of our Story for All Ages said, water is the first medicine. And that wisdom was evident in the photos so many of you shared, lakes and ponds, rivers and streams. Snow. Water is powerful. Nature is powerful. And that is actually provable. There is research that indicates time in nature is genuinely good for us, not just for physical exercise, but also because it helps us mentally and emotionally, and that helps us in our social interactions. Don't you love it when science proves that things you intuitively know are true? Especially when that means you can give yourself permission to do more of something you enjoy, like spending time outdoors. The research shows that time in nature helps us manage our directed attention capacity, which is the key to thriving at work and school and in our social interactions. This is how it works. Humans, you know I'm a college professor, there had to be a lecture in here somewhere. Humans have two types of attention that we use to process information. One is referred to as fascination or involuntary attention, and the other is called directed attention or voluntary attention. Now, fascination, as the name implies, refers to the type of attention when you're totally caught up in something. Certain things just grab your attention. Some of these things probably helped our ancestors survive. Our attention is actually naturally drawn to water and to food, which are really basic to survival. But we also immediately respond to loud noises or fast movements because those could be sources of danger, and we have to check them out if we're going to survive. Shiny things catch our eyes. They could be the eyes of predators out to eat us, or they could be things that we can eat. Now, fascination has certain characteristics. It's involuntary and effortless. No matter how hard you're concentrating on something else, things that are fascinating will drag your attention toward them. A loud noise or a baby crying will instantly break your concentration. And conversely, when you're fascinated by something, your attention is so caught up that you may not notice the passage of time or hear someone speaking to you. Maybe you've had that experience when you're playing a musical instrument or reading a novel or playing a video game, things that truly absorb your attention without much effort. The second type of attention, directed attention, requires much more effort. This is the voluntary attention we use to learn complex tasks or to focus on a video sermon that lasts 20 minutes and requires us to not pay attention to those other things we could be doing instead. It is something we learn to do as children, to gradually sit and stay focused for longer periods of time so we can gain new skills and complete projects. But it takes effort because we have to stay focused despite distractions like feeling hungry or hearing voices nearby in the classroom or seeing birds fly past the window. We learn to actually ignore sights, sounds, and feelings that would break our concentration so that we can stay focused on that not entirely fascinating task that is important enough for us to want to get it done. Every day, we wake up in the morning with a certain amount of directed attention capacity. That's our capacity to actually stay focused on something when we have to use effort to do it. And that capacity is kind of like a battery. It recharges overnight while we sleep. And then during the day, as we work hard to focus on our various tasks, we gradually wear down our capacity for directed attention. You've probably noticed it's easier to concentrate in the morning than in the late afternoon. And maybe you just thought that had to do with the levels of caffeine in your system, but it's actually normal. As the day goes on, your capacity for directed attention wears down. And it wears down faster if you put lots of demands on it. For example, if you work in a chaotic environment with a lot of distractions like a television or coworkers, it takes much more energy to concentrate. If you're trying to ignore physical discomfort like a headache or an injury, it takes much more energy to concentrate. If you're worried and stressed, it takes much more energy to concentrate. Stresses like these wear out your directed attention capacity quickly. And then eventually you get to the point where you're suffering from what's called directed attention fatigue. Now, students aren't always very clever when they come up with jokes. So the joke in school was always the initials of directed attention fatigue are DAF, and therefore we always referred to people who had directed attention fatigue as people suffering from daffiness. So here are the symptoms of daffiness or directed attention fatigue. You might find it takes twice as long to complete a project than it would normally. Or maybe you're really distractible. So this may have happened to some of you. I know it's happened to me. You start out, you're working on a project, and then you think, I need a cup of tea. So you go to the kitchen and decide that you need to do something you see in the kitchen, maybe sorting some magazine catalogs that you saw on the counter as you were walking in. And you start sorting them, and that reminds you, you need to take out the trash. And on your way to take out the trash, you actually see some other task that you've been meaning to do, been putting off. So instead of taking out the trash, you start on that other task, but then the phone rings and you go to answer the phone. And while you're answering the phone, you forget about the task that you were doing in the basement that you had meant to do instead of taking out the trash. And somehow at the end of the day, you've got about 6 projects you started and didn't finish. And you kind of wonder where the day went and why you didn't accomplish anything. That's directed attention fatigue. Maybe it only happens to me. Now, directed attention fatigue can also undermine your social interactions. It can cause you to be lacking in patience, and that might lead you to snap at someone over something small. It might lead to greater conflict between people because people who are daffy are more likely to dig in instead of being willing to compromise when they have a disagreement with someone. It turns out that social interactions actually take a lot of directed attention. It takes effort to be polite. It takes effort to listen and not interrupt people. It takes effort not to say undiplomatic things. When we're daffy, we're much more likely to say things we regret afterwards. I always know my directed attention capacity is shot when it gets to the point where I keep interrupting people. So putting all this together, you can see why the past year probably exhausted our capacity for directed attention, which might explain that thing everyone's calling COVID brain. Virtual work and virtual school required way more effort in order to get the same amount of work done. Concentrating on a screen and interactions with people in a 2-dimensional format takes much more concentration, much more effort than interacting and focusing in person. We have evolved for a social environment where we are in 3 dimensions, not 2 dimensions. And add to that, that we were working in distracting environments with a lot of extra people around. Some people were trying to work while homeschooling their kids. And we were under emotional strain, fear of disease, concerned for our loved ones. Throw in on top of that, we were dealing with intense emotional burdens as we were confronted by horrifying evidence of our nation's social injustices and our political conflicts. It's been like a perfect storm hammering away at our directed attention capacity. And this is where nature becomes not just a refuge, but an antidote. Research shows that time in nature actually restores directed attention capacity. The experiments used to prove this are very clever. Researchers would gather up a bunch of people to participate in an experiment, many of whom were probably graduate students who can get paid to do this sort of thing. And they would give them a task like proofreading an article and measure their capacity for focusing and finding the various errors in the article, and then subject them to activities that would wear down their directed attention capacity. Things like counting backwards from 100 by sevens. And then after wearing down their directed attention capacity, the groups of subjects would be divided into 3 categories. And one group would basically just sit around for half an hour indoors. And then 2 other groups would go outdoors. One would walk in an urban environment for half an hour, and the other would walk in a green space for half an hour. And then everybody would be brought back in, and again, given one of those tasks that requires directed attention, like proofreading, and they would compare the results between how they could do before their directed attention capacity had been worn down and how they could do afterwards. And what this research demonstrated was that people who walked in a green space restored their capacity to focus far more than people who just walked. Varying the treatment, so an urban environment versus a green environment, meant they could test whether it was just the exercise, the act of walking, or whether it was actually the physical space, the area in which they walked, that made a difference. And it turned out green space was a better way to restore directed attention than simply walking. Why does nature restore our directed attention capacity? Well, it's because nature is fascinating. It captures our attention without effort. And so while we're outdoors and we're watching the trees and we're watching the wind and we're watching the squirrels, our directed attention capacity actually gets to rest and restore. So therefore, we can see that nature is not just a physical refuge. It's also good for our mental functioning, our emotional health, and our social relationships. This research can only lead to one conclusion. We all need a nature prescription to get us through this year. No more excuses. Go outside as often as possible. Doctor's orders. Now, I'd like to return to this idea of pilgrimage, a pilgrimage to the backyard. In religious traditions, pilgrimages are important spiritual practices. They're journeys through physical and mental space that lead to personal and social transformation. Traditionally, people who went on pilgrimage would change their behavior while they traveled. This was a way to distinguish the pilgrim life from regular daily life. So, for example, they might wear special clothing, like Muslims who all wear identical white garments when they make the pilgrimage to Mecca. And they might eat special diets, like Hindus who abstain from eating meat, even if they are not pure vegetarians in their daily lives. Activities also change on pilgrimage, with time for prayer and singing and reading scriptures. In a way, pilgrims are in a time outside of regular time, a place outside of regular space. And it's also striking how many pilgrimage destinations are in awe-inspiring natural areas, sacred groves and caves, mountaintops, and the shores of rivers and oceans. Some pilgrimages are undertaken for this worldly benefits like health and wealth. Others are undertaken to reorient life, to ponder how to live a more meaningful life. In this case, a pilgrimage might help someone develop spiritual habits and focus on how to live in accord with ethical values so that these habits and values can be carried back home and integrated into daily life. I wonder if this pandemic year will truly be like a pilgrimage, a year-long journey that will lead to personal and social transformations. Many of us wore special clothing, like sweatpants and Zoom shirts. We ate simple food, at least if you're like me and not a great cook and had to eat at home and do your own cooking, so it was not going to be fancy. On a more serious note, we were stressed by directed attention fatigue in a year of high attention demands. So we pared back obligations and projects and belongings that no longer seemed worth the effort. We discovered what we could live without and what really mattered. We also worked hard to help our community, each as best we could. It was so encouraging to see individuals and community groups focusing on food security and housing access, finding new ways to feed school children who could not eat at school, and to protect vulnerable community members from exposure to disease. Foundations began putting more resources into local organizations working to build long-term safety nets. And there was much more attention to diversity and support for organizations led by people of color. Watching the changes in our community this year, it seems like there may be real hope for transformation. Maybe this peculiar year can also be a pilgrimage year that leads to something better than the system we lived in before. As Simran Sethi said in our reading about The Secret in the Soil, we are not the same people we were 10 months ago. We are becoming aware that the future is shaped by what we feed and water today. And as Sethi said, we can cultivate with purpose, remembering the lessons embedded in the seeds we chose to sow, pruning back systems that have failed so many, and nurturing tender shoots of awareness into commitment, we can nourish what we have found in one another. I think these two ideas go well together, the idea of a pilgrimage and the knowledge that nature can restore us mentally and emotionally. As we gradually move back into social activity, we will need the solace of time in nature to fortify us for the days ahead. It's going to take some doing to actually get used to all that social activity again. And there's going to be a lot of risk assessment and judgments to make along the way as we figure out what we're willing to do and not willing to do as things gradually change. So as we head into this next phase of learning and growing and evaluating and refuging, may we remember that water is the first medicine. May we give ourselves permission to spend time outdoors in fascinating nature to restore our minds and calm our spirits. May we continue to make pilgrimages to our backyards, our parks, our rivers and lakes. And may we be continually reminded how much a part of everything we are and how much all things are part of us. May it be so.
Standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean, still my dry land heart can say, I've been sailing all my life now, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue gold home. Sun, my sail, and moon, my rudder, as I fly the starry seas, leaning over the edge in wonder, casting questions into the deep, drifting here with my ship's companions, all we kindred pilgrim souls, making our way by the light of the heavens in our beautiful blue gold home. I give thanks to the waves upholding me, hail the great winds urging me on, breathe the infinite sea before me, sing the sky my sailor song. I was born upon the fathoms, never harbor or port have I known. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue gold home. The wide universe is the ocean I travel, and the earth is my blue gold home. My blue gold home. My blue gold home.
So thank you all for joining us on this Earth Day Sunday. It's going to be a beautiful day. I hope you all get to go outside and make a little pilgrimage, not to some distant sacred site, but to your own backyard, which can be just as transformative as Mecca or Jerusalem or the Ganges or any of those distant sites. Go in peace.
I invite you all to stay after our postlude for our 15-minute coffee hour. If not, thank you for being here today, and we'll see you next time.